Listen to me very closely. Too many people want to be called a leader, but they don't want to carry the weight that comes with it. Everybody loves the title. Everybody loves the applause. But very few are willing to take the responsibility that leadership demands. See, the difference between a real leader and a fake one is simple. When things go wrong, fake leaders point out the window. They point at the team. They point at the system. They point at the resources. They point at everybody but themselves. But real leaders don't look out the window first. They look in the mirror. Why? Because the mirror never lies. The mirror doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't care about your reasons. It doesn't care about your story. It reflects exactly what you put in. And when you step in front of that mirror, you got to ask yourself, am I giving 120%? Am I showing up with consistency? Am I leading by example, or am I just talking? See, leadership is not about control. It's about accountability. And accountability starts with the person in the mirror. Get to understand something today. Greatness doesn't start when your team claps for you. Greatness doesn't start when your followers praise you. Greatness doesn't even start when you achieve success. No. Greatness starts when you can look yourself in the mirror and be honest. Because the truth is, you can fool the world, but you can't fool that reflection. Real leaders wake up every single day, and before they ask anything from their team, they ask everything from themselves. Before they demand discipline, they check their own. Before they demand excellence, they check their own. Before they demand consistency, they check their own. That's why real leaders always look into the mirror, because they understand that the mirror is not just a reflection of who they are. It's a reflection of the standard they set for everyone else. So today, I want to break it down. I want to show you why the mirror is the most powerful tool a leader has. And I want you to walk away knowing that if you want to be a real leader, if you want to transform your team, your family, your business, your community, then you have to master the discipline of looking into the mirror first. Accountability starts with the mirror. When you wake up in the morning and look at yourself in that glass, you are face to face with the one person who has the most control over your destiny. Not your boss, not your coach, not your parents, not your environment, you. The mirror is where accountability begins because it forces you to stop blaming everybody else and start taking ownership. Too many people spend their whole lives pointing fingers at other people for why they aren't successful, why they aren't where they want to be, why they aren't happy. They point at the economy, they point at their upbringing, they point at their spouse, they point at the system. But the truth is, as long as you are pointing outward, you will never change what's inward. The mirror is the truth teller. It doesn't allow you to hide. It doesn't allow you to pretend. When you stand there and look at your reflection, you see the reality of what you've been doing, you've been neglecting, and what you've been settling for. Accountability starts with the mirror because until you can be real with yourself, you'll never be real with anybody else. Think about it. The most dangerous lies are not the lies we tell others. It's the lies we tell ourselves. We convince ourselves we're working hard when deep down we know we're cutting corners. We convince ourselves we're giving our best when we're really holding back. We convince ourselves that we deserve more when in reality we haven't earned more. The mirror cuts through that. The mirror doesn't lie. It shows you exactly what you put in. And if you want to be a leader, if you want to be someone that people can follow, you have to stop lying to yourself. You have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, if my team fails, it's because I didn't set the tone. If my family struggles, it's because I didn't show up. If my business is slipping, it's because I allow standards to slip. Accountability starts with the mirror because leaders don't wait for other people to change first. They change themselves. There is something powerful about a leader who takes full responsibility. When a leader looks into the mirror and says, this is on me, it changes the entire atmosphere. Because people are used to blame culture. They are used to excuses. They are used to finger pointing. But when a leader steps up and says, I know this is my responsibility, it builds trust. People see that. They respect that. They are more willing to follow someone who holds themselves to the highest standard. Accountability starts with the mirror because that reflection is the foundation of credibility. People will forgive mistakes, but they will not forgive hypocrisy. If you don't own your reflection, your leadership becomes hollow. Now, let me make this real for you. Imagine a coach whose team keeps losing. A weak coach blames the players. He says that they're not disciplined enough, they're not talented enough, they're not focused enough. But a real coach goes into the locker room, looks himself in the mirror and asks, am I teaching the right way? Am I motivating them properly? Am I preparing them with everything they need? That's accountability. Or think about a business leader. Sales are dropping, morale is low. A weak leader blames the economy, blames the competitors, blames the employees. But a real leader looks into the mirror and says, did I set the vision clearly? Did I inspire them? Did I provide the tools they need? Accountability doesn't mean you take the blame for everything, but it does mean you own your role. You take responsibility for what's in your control. The mirror also humbles you. When you truly embrace accountability, you stop walking around with ego. Ego says, it's not my fault. I've done everything I could. Problem is them. Accountability says, what more could I have done? Where did I drop the ball? How can I improve? The mirror humbles you because it reminds you that you are not perfect. You are not exempt. Every single day you have areas you can grow. And the moment you stop holding yourself accountable, you start slipping. That's why some leaders fall. They stop looking in the mirror and stop believing their own hype. They think they made it. They think they've arrived, and they stop checking themselves. Accountability starts with the mirror because it keeps you grounded, it keeps you honest, and it keeps you hungry. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you stood in front of the mirror and asked yourself tough questions? Not the easy questions, not the surface questions, but the hard ones. Am I giving my absolute best? Did I show up with full effort today? Am I treating people the way I want to be treated? Am I practicing what I preach? That's uncomfortable, isn't it? But that discomfort is where growth lives. Real leaders don't run from that discomfort. They lean into it. They understand that if they can be brutally honest with themselves, they can be honest with everyone else. Accountability starts with the mirror because that is the training ground for truth. If you can't confront yourself, how will you confront a situation? If you can't discipline yourself, how will you discipline a team? Another reason accountability begins with the mirror is because leadership is influence, and influence comes from integrity. People can feel whether you're authentic or not. They can sense whether you're really living what you're asking them to live. You can't demand discipline from your team if you don't have discipline yourself. You can't demand sacrifice if you're not willing to sacrifice. The mirror checks that. The mirror makes you ask, am I leading from example, or am I just barking orders? Because people don't follow words. They follow example. They follow the standard they see in you. Accountability starts with the mirror because it forces you to align your actions with your words. There's also a freedom in accountability. See, when you stop blaming and start owning, you take back your power. As long as you blame others, you are powerless. You're saying your life depends on what someone else does. But when you look in the mirror and say, it's on me, you take control. You reclaim your authority over your own life. That's what leaders do. They don't wait for conditions to be perfect. They don't wait for others to make it easier. They say, I'll take what I've got and I'll make it happen. Accountability starts with the mirror because it puts you back in control. And let's be real. People need leaders who will look in the mirror. Families need parents who will stop blaming each other and start taking responsibility. Teams need captains who will stop blaming referees and start focusing on what they can control. Communities need leaders who will stop pointing at systems and start asking, what can I do to make a difference? Accountability always begins with the mirror because the mirror is where excuses die and responsibility is born. The greatest leaders in history and business and sports and life, they all had one thing in common. They looked into the mirror first. They didn't pretend they had it all together. They didn't run from accountability. They embraced it. They understood that you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. And you can't lead yourself until you can face yourself. Accountability is not easy. It's not glamorous. It doesn't get applause. But it's the foundation of everything. And that's why accountability starts with the mirror. So the next time you wake up, before you pick up your phone, before you check social media, before you check emails, I challenge you to stand in front of that mirror. I challenge you to look yourself in the eyes and ask, am I doing everything I can to be the leader I was created to be? Because at the end of the day, leadership is not about them. It's about you. And if you can win the battle in the mirror, you can win the battle in life. The mirror reveals truth, not excuses. Every single day, people walk around carrying stories they've created to protect themselves from the pain of reality. They tell themselves they're tired because they didn't get enough sleep, when the truth is, they spent hours scrolling their phones. They tell themselves they can't succeed because no one gave them an opportunity, when the truth is, they haven't sharpened their skills. They tell themselves the reason they aren't where they want to be is because of someone else's decision, someone else's mistake, someone else's power. But when you stand in front of a mirror, that piece of glass strips away every excuse. It shows you who you are, exactly as you are, without filters, without stories, without pity. The mirror reflects the truth, and the truth is what leaders must face if they want to grow. Excuses are comfortable. Excuses feel good. They make us feel like victims instead of participants, like passengers instead of drivers. They let us off the hook for giving less than our best, but excuses don't change your circumstances, they don't improve your life, and they don't move you closer to your goals. Excuses are like a soft pillow. You can rest on them, but you'll never rise from them. Leaders understand that the mirror doesn't care about excuses. The mirror doesn't nod its head and agree with your story. It doesn't listen to your reasons for why you didn't show up, why you didn't push hard, why you didn't lead with excellence. The mirror simply reflects. You can tell yourself you're working hard, but the reflection will show whether your body is strong, whether your eyes are tired from real work or from distraction. You can tell yourself you're giving your all, but the mirror will show the extra weight of laziness, the lack of glow that comes from discipline. The mirror reveals truth, not excuses. Think about the moments in your life when you've avoided the mirror. Maybe you've gone through a season where you didn't want to face yourself. You avoided eye contact with your own reflection because deep down you knew you weren't giving it your all. That's what excuses do. They create distance between you and your own truth. But leadership demands the opposite. Leadership demands that you lean in, that you look directly into that reflection and admit the truth, even when it hurts. Because only when you face the truth can you change it. If you keep covering the truth with excuse, you will stay stuck in the same cycle. And worse, you will drag others into it with you. A leader cannot afford excuses. Why? Because excuses spread. If you lead with excuses, your team will adopt them. If you let yourself off the hook, they will let themselves off the hook. If you convince yourself that circumstances are the reason you fail, they will copy that mindset. Leaders don't just lead by order, they lead by atmosphere, and excuses poison the atmosphere. The mirror reveals truth, and that truth creates accountability. And accountability creates culture. Imagine standing in front of your team and saying, "Oh, we didn't succeed because they didn't give us enough resources." That statement might feel justified, but it destroys ownership. Now imagine standing in front of your team and saying, "We didn't succeed because I didn't prepare us enough. I didn't push hard enough. I didn't set the standard high enough." That's on me. That truth is heavy, but it builds trust. People see that you aren't hiding, you aren't running. You aren't creating excuses. You are facing the truth, and that inspires others to do the same. The mirror has a way of stripping us of illusions. You might think you're disciplined until you see the results staring back at you. You might think you're consistent until you see how many days you missed, how many promises you broke, how many times you started something but didn't finish. The mirror doesn't play favorites. It doesn't flatter. It doesn't bend reality to make you feel good. It shows you the exact reflection of your input. That's why so many people avoid it. But real leaders run to it. They understand that feedback is a gift, and the mirror is the most honest feedback you will ever get. Excuse, delay, growth. Truth accelerates it. Where you stop saying, "I don't have time," and admit, "I didn't manage my time." You take back control. When you stop saying, "Oh, people don't support me," and admit, "I haven't built strong enough relationships," you empower yourself to change. When you stop saying, "I wasn't given a chance," and admit, "I didn't create enough value," you step into ownership. The mirror reveals truth, not excuses. And that truth is where change begins. Imagine a student who blames the teacher for every bad grade. Imagine an employee who blames the company for every missed opportunity. Imagine an athlete who blames the referee for every loss. They may sound convincing for a while, but in the mirror, the truth is clear. They didn't study enough, they didn't work enough, they didn't prepare enough. And until they admit that truth, nothing will change. Leaders cannot operate in illusion. Leaders cannot guide people while living in denial. If you want to lead, you must embrace the mirror's truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is, because that discomfort forces you to rise. Think of some of the greatest leaders and achievers in history. They didn't reach greatness by clinging to excuses. They looked in the mirror and admitted their shortcomings. They accepted responsibility for their failure. They recognized the gap between where they were and where they needed to be. They faced that truth every day, and that's what drove them to improve. Excuses might make you feel better in the moment, but truth makes you better for life. Excuses let you stay the same, but truth forces you to evolve. Excuses keep you in comfort, but truth moves you into growth. The mirror also teaches humility. It teaches you that you are not as flawless as you think. It teaches you that your effort is not as consistent as you claim. It teaches you that your leadership is not as strong as you portray, and that humility is powerful because it keeps you hungry. A leader who stops making excuses and starts embracing truth becomes unstoppable. They don't waste energy protecting their ego. They use that energy to grow. They don't spend time defending their shortcomings. They spend time fixing them. They don't waste focus on appearances. They put focus on substance. The mirror reveals truth, and truth fuels transformation. Let me tell you this. The world does not reward excuses, it rewards results. You can tell your team, your boss, your family, your followers all the reasons you didn't make it happen. But at the end of the day, the scoreboard shows the truth. The bank account shows the truth. The mirror shows the truth. And people don't follow excuses. They follow results. That's why leaders must embrace the mirror, because the mirror prepares you for reality. It doesn't let you build your house on sand. It makes sure your foundation is strong. It reminds you that if you want something, you must earn it. And you must earn it with consistency, discipline, and ownership. So tomorrow morning, when you wake up and look at yourself, don't run from the reflection. Don't cover it up with excuses. Don't tell yourself stories that make you feel better, but keep you weak. Say to yourself, I didn't give my all yesterday, but today I will. I didn't lead at my best but today I will. I didn't set the right example yesterday, but today I will. That's the power of the mirror. It reveals truth, not excuses. And once you embrace that truth, there is nothing you cannot change. Because at the end of the day, leadership is not about perfection. It's not about pretending you have it all together. It's about owning who you are, facing your truth, and leading from that place of authenticity. The mirror gives you that gift. It strips away the excuses, it silences the lies, and it shows you reality. And when you embrace reality, you gain the power to transform it. That is why the mirror is a leader's greatest teacher. That is why excuses have no place in leadership. And that is why the mirror reveals truth, not excuses. Leadership is about modeling, not commanding. Anybody can give orders. Anybody can stand at the front of a room and tell people what to do. Anybody can bark commands and expect obedience. But real leadership, the kind that lasts, the kind that transforms people, doesn't come from your mouth. It comes from your actions. People don't follow instruction. They follow example. They don't listen to what you say nearly as much as they watch what you do. The truth is, the loudest message a leader sends is not in their words, but in their behavior. And if your behavior doesn't line up with your message, your leadership will never carry weight. Think about it. We've all had someone in our lives who told us what to do but didn't live it themselves. A teacher who said, pay attention, but was distracted themselves. A parent who said, be disciplined, but didn't practice discipline in their own habits. A manager who said, work harder, but spent half the day slacking. You might hear their words, but their example speaks louder, and what it says is, do as I say, not as I do. That's not leadership. That's hypocrisy. And people don't respect hypocrisy. They might comply out of fear. They might obey because they don't want consequences. But they will not follow with loyalty. They will not give their heart. And they will not trust that leader long term. Leadership is about modeling, not commanding, because people are inspired by what they see, not what they're told. If you look at the greatest leaders in any arena, sports, business, family, community, you'll notice that they didn't just talk about standards. They lived the standards. A great coach doesn't just tell players to show up early. He shows up first. A great parent doesn't just tell their child to be honest. They practice honesty even when it's uncomfortable. A great entrepreneur doesn't just tell their team to hustle. They outwork everyone in the room. That's modeling. And when people see that, it ignites something inside them. Because deep down, every human being wants to follow authenticity. They want to follow someone whose walk matches their talk. Commands can control behavior for a moment, but modeling shapes character for a lifetime. When you command people, you may get short-term results. They'll do what you said while you're watching, but the moment your eyes are off them, they'll go back to old habits. Why? Because nothing truly changed inside them. But when you model behavior, when they watch you live it, they internalize it. They don't just comply, they adopt the standard. That's why leadership through example is so powerful. You're not just controlling actions, you're transforming mindsets. You're not just telling them what to do, you're showing them how to be. Let me give you an example. Imagine a leader who tells their team, we need to stay disciplined. We need to be consistent. We need to bring energy every day. Those are powerful words, but then the team notices that this leader shows up late, cuts corners, loses focus, and doesn't bring energy. What do you think happens? The team follows the example, not the command. The leader said discipline, but the example said laziness, and the example wins every time. Now imagine the opposite. A leader says the same thing, oh, we need discipline, consistency, energy. But this time, they are the first to arrive, the last to leave. They bring passion even on tough days, and they give their all in every situation. Now what happened? The team feels that energy, they mirror that consistency, and they rise to that standard because they see it lived out in front of them. That's why leadership is about modeling, not commanding. The mirror ties into this as well. When you look into the mirror, you're not just looking at your personal reflection. You're looking at the standard you're setting for others. If you're a leader, people are watching you. They're watching how you handle pressure. They're watching how you handle failure. They're watching how you respond when things don't go your way. They're not listening to the speech you gave last week nearly as much as they're watching how you live today. You can't demand something you don't display. If you want respect, you must be respectful. If you want effort, you must give effort. If you want integrity, you must practice integrity. If you want your team to trust you, you must first be trustworthy. Leadership starts with modeling, because what you model becomes the culture of the people who follow you. Commands are external, but modeling is internal. Commands create compliance, but modeling creates conviction. Compliance fades when the pressure is gone, but conviction lasts when no one is watching. If you've ever noticed, the leaders who change live, the ones whose actions inspire conviction in their followers. People don't follow them because they have to. They follow because they want to. They don't follow because they're forced. They follow because they're inspired. And inspiration doesn't come from orders. It comes from example. This is why parenting is one of the purest forms of leadership. You can tell your child 1,000 times to be kind, but if you aren't kind, they won't learn it. You can tell them to work hard, but if you're lazy, they won't practice it. You can tell them to value education, but if they never see you learning, they won't care. Children copy what they see, not what they hear. And adults are the same way. Teams copy their leaders. Communities copy their leaders. Modeling sets the pattern. Another truth is that commanding without modeling creates rebellion. When people sense that their leader doesn't live what they preach, it breeds resentment. It makes them feel like the leader is using authority to cover up weakness. That's why so many organizations fail. Not because the vision was wrong, not because the strategy was bad, but because the leader wasn't modeling what they expected. On the flip side, when a leader models what they ask of others, it creates unity. People feel like we're all in this together. We're following someone who's in the trenches with us. That unity is powerful. It drives loyalty, effort, and resilience. The best leaders in the world understand they are always on stage. Every moment is an opportunity to model. How you greet people in the morning models something. How you deal with setbacks models something. how you talk to people when you stress model something. Leadership is not just about the big speeches and the big decisions. It's about the small, consistent behaviors that people witness day after day. That's where credibility is built or broken. If your small actions don't line up with your big words, your leadership collapses. And here's something important. Modeling doesn't mean being perfect. It means being authentic. People don't need a flawless leader. They need a real one. They need someone who admits mistakes, owns them, and grows from them. Modeling vulnerability is also leadership. When people see you fail and get back up, they learn resilience. When they see you admit you were wrong and fix it, they learn humility. When they see you stay calm under pressure, they learn emotional strength. Modeling is not about showing them an image of perfection. It's about showing them the process of progress. That's what inspires people, the consistency of growth, not the illusion of perfection. Leadership by command alone is fragile. It only lasts as long as your authority is unquestioned. But leadership by modeling is unshakable. Even if you lose your title, people will still follow your example. Even if circumstances change, your influence remains. That's why the most impactful leaders are remembered not for what they said, but for how they lived. Think about the people you admire most in your own life. Chances are, it's not just because of what they told you, but because of what you saw in them. You admire their discipline, their kindness, their work ethic, their courage. You admired the way they modeled the life you wanted to live. Leadership is about modeling, not commanding, because modeling multiplies leaders. Commands may get people to obey, but modeling empowers people to lead themselves. When someone sees your example and decides to adopt that standard for their own life, you created another leader. That's how leadership multiplies. It's not by controlling more people with commands, but by inspiring more people with example. Commands create followers. Modeling creates leaders. So if you want to know how strong your leadership is, don't look at I'll mail them other than the orders you give. Look at your reflection. Ask yourself, would I follow me if I weren't me? Would I be inspired by the way I live? Would I be motivated by my habits, my effort, my integrity? That's the real test. If the answer is yes, then you're leading by modeling. If the answer is no, then you're just commanding, and commanding will only take you so far. At the end of the day, leadership is a mirror game. Your people reflect what they see in you. If they see excuses, they'll make excuses. They'll make excuses. If they see laziness, they'll be lazy. If they see discipline, they'll become disciplined. If they see passion, they'll bring passion. The mirror reveals what you are, and what you are becomes what your people are. That's why leadership is about modeling, not commanding. Because the example you set in the mirror becomes the example your people live in the world. When real leaders look into the mirror, they are not seeking perfection, but progress. And that is one of the most powerful qualities that separate them from others. Too often, we live in a world where people are pressured to appear flawless, to put on a show of having everything together, of making no mistakes. But real leaders know that perfection is a myth, and chasing is a path that leads only to frustration, disappointment, and stagnation. Instead, when they look at themselves, they're asking one question: am I better today than I was yesterday? That is the measure of true growth. They are not comparing themselves with their peers, competitor, critics. They are competing with their own reflection. This focus on progress over perfection creates a mindset of continuous improvement, where each day is an opportunity to refine, to evolve, and to become stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. Think about the greatest leaders across history, from innovators to social change makers, and you'll notice that none of them were flawless individuals. They made mistakes, sometimes big ones, but what made them leaders wasn't an absence of error, but their determination to learn from those moments and turn them into stepping stones. They weren't afraid of failure because they understood that failure was feedback, a tool that pointed them toward the next version of themselves. In the mirror, they saw both their scars and their potential, and they embraced both with humility. That humility allowed them to acknowledge shortcomings without shame and to work relentlessly to improve without being enslaved to the idea of perfection. Real leaders carry this philosophy into their daily lives. For example, when faced with setbacks, they do not obsess over how it damages their image. Instead, they analyze what went wrong, what can be adjusted, and what must be done differently next time. They are not performing for the crowd. They are working for the person in the mirror. This is why they never stall in life. People chasing perfection often hesitate, waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity, or a flawless plan. And in doing so, they lose valuable time and momentum. Leaders who embrace progress understand that action, even imperfect action, is far more powerful than inaction. Each step, no matter how small or flawed, creates movement, and movement creates results. When a leader chooses progress over perfection, it also liberates those around them. People working with or under such leaders feel empowered because they see authenticity in action. They see someone who admits, I don't have all the answers yet, but I am willing to grow with you to learn alongside you. That vulnerability breeds trust, and trust is the foundation of leadership. Perfection creates pressure, both on the leader and on those around them, but progress creates possibility. Teams thrive in environments where mistakes are not punishable, but are instead viewed as opportunities for learning. That culture inspires creativity, risk-taking, and innovation because people know they won't be crushed for failing. They'll be encouraged for trying. It's also worth noting that progress is measurable while perfection is not. Perfection is a moving target that keeps shifting further away no matter how much you accomplish. Leaders who fix their eyes on perfection often find themselves dissatisfied, no matter their achievements. In contrast, leaders who focus on progress can look back at their journey and see tangible evidence of growth. The projects they once struggled with, but now handle with ease. The conversations they once avoided, but now navigate with confidence. The skills they once lacked, but have since developed. Looking into the mirror becomes a moment of gratitude because they see how far they've come, even as they strive to go further. That balance of appreciation and ambition fuels sustainable growth, while perfection-driven ambition often leads to burnout and disillusionment. The mirror then becomes a checkpoint rather than a stage. Each morning or evening, real leaders reflect on whether they took steps forward. Did they improve their mindset, their discipline, their compassion, or their effectiveness? Did they push a little harder, think a little deeper, or give a little more than yesterday? This accountability is not about shaming themselves for falling short, but about motivating themselves to keep climbing. Because the truth is, leadership is not about reaching a final destination of perfection, but about walking a journey of progress. The road never ends, and that's what makes it meaningful. Consider how this principle applies not only in leadership, but in personal life. Imagine a parent striving to be the best role model for their children. If they chase perfection, they would constantly feel inadequate because no parent is perfect. But if they pursue progress, each day becomes an opportunity to communicate better, to be more patient, to listen more attentively. That consistent effort leaves a lasting impact on the child, far more powerful than an impossible illusion of flawless parenting. In the same way, a business leader focusing on progress creates a legacy of growth, adaptability, and resilience, qualities that outlive them and influence generations. Leaders who prioritize progress also develop resilience to criticism. They understand that not everyone will see or appreciate their journey, but that doesn't derail them. Critics often expect leaders to be flawless, to never stumble or misstep, but progress. Driven leaders know that stumbles are part of the path. Instead of hiding from criticism, they filter it. If it's constructive, they use it to grow. If it's baseless, they let it go because they know their validation comes from the reflection in the mirror, not from the opinions of the crowd. That strength allows them to continue moving forward when others will be paralyzed by fear of judgment. This principle of progress over perfection also nurtures longevity in leadership. Leaders who chase perfection burn out because they live in a constant state of pressure and dissatisfaction. Leaders who chase progress, however, find fulfillment in the process. Each day of growth is a win. Each obstacle overcome, no matter how small, is celebrated as proof of advancement. This steady rhythm sustains their end, allows them to endure the challenges of leadership without collapsing under the weight of impossible expectations. When you look at a real leader's life, you realize that greatness didn't arrive overnight. It was built day by day, decision by decision, reflection by reflection. The mirror was their silent mentor, showing them not only who they were, but who they were becoming. And because they chose progress, they allowed themselves to be works in progress. Never finished, never flawless, but always evolving. That humility and commitment to growth became their true legacy. So when real leaders look into the mirror, they are not hoping to see perfection staring back at them. They are searching for evidence of progress, for signs that they are closer to their vision today than they were yesterday. And in doing so, they remind us all that leadership is not about being perfect. It's about being persistent, about showing up, about refusing to settle for who you were when you can become so much more. The reflection they on is not flawless, but fearless, because it represents the courage to keep growing. And that is what makes them leaders worth following. When we talk about accountability, most people immediately think of rules, regulations, or external forces that hold them in check. They think of bosses, teachers, or systems that remind them of their duties. But true leaders understand that accountability doesn't start from the outside. It begins from within. It starts in the quiet moments when no one is watching, when the applause has died down, when the spotlight is gone, and you are left alone with the person staring back at you in the mirror. The mirror doesn't lie. It reflects who you really are, not who you pretend to be. That's why real leaders always turn to the mirror, because it forces them to confront themselves, their actions, and their impact. They know that without accountability, leadership is nothing more than a title. But with accountability, leadership becomes a calling, a responsibility, and a commitment to live in integrity. Think about this. Anyone can talk a good game. Anyone can stand on a stage, deliver powerful words, or wear a suit that makes them look the part. But the true test of leadership isn't in appearances, it's in actions. And those actions only have value when a leader is accountable for them. When leaders hold themselves accountable, they send a powerful message to everyone around them. I will not demand from you what I am unwilling to demand from myself. That's where trust begins. That's where credibility is born. Without accountability, leadership is hollow, fragile, and temporary. With accountability, leadership is strong, enduring, and transformative. Accountability means taking ownership. It means saying, this is mine. This mistake is mine. This success, it's ours, but the responsibility, it starts with me. Too often, people in positions of power look for scapegoats when things go wrong. They point fingers, shift blame, excuse themselves. But real leaders reject that path. They don't blame circumstances, they don't blame their team, and they don't blame their team, and they don't blame fate. They look into the mirror and say, what could I have done differently? How can I improve? How do I make sure this doesn't happen again? That level of accountability is rare, but it's also what separates great leaders from the rest. Consider history. Some of the greatest leaders the world has ever seen weren't perfect. They made mistakes, some of them massive. But what made them respected was their ability to own those mistakes. When leaders say, I was wrong and I will make it right, they not only set an example, but also build a culture where accountability is valued. People begin to see that it's okay to admit flaws as long as you're willing to correct them. This creates an environment where growth, honesty, and progress flourish. Without accountability, on the other hand, organizations crumble from within. Teams lose trust. People stop believing in the mission, and eventually everything collapses. Accountability is also about consistency. A real leader doesn't just take credit when things go well and vanish when things go badly. They show up the same way in both victory and defeat. They celebrate their team in triumph, and they shield their team in failure. That's accountability in action. It's easy to be visible when the results are great. But when the weight of disappointment is heavy, when the critics are loud, when the pressure is suffocating, that's when accountability matters most. Leaders who embrace it in those moments prove they are worthy of following. Another element of accountability is self-discipline. A leader who looks into the mirror daily is constantly checking themselves. They ask, am I keeping my promises? Am I following through on what I said I would do? Am I living up to the standards I've set for others? Accountability is not a one-time act. It's a lifestyle. Aligning your words with your deeds every single day. Leaders who fail to do this eventually lose their influence because people can spot inconsistency a mile away. Words are cheap, but actions backed by accountability are priceless. In personal life as well, accountability is everything. Imagine a father who tells his children to be honest, but they catch him lying. Imagine a teacher who tells their student work hard, but they cut corners themselves upset. Imagine a coach who preaches discipline but doesn't practice it. In every case, the leader's lack of accountability destroys credibility. The same principle applies in companies, communities, and nations. Leadership without accountability is like a house built on sand. It may look fine for a while, but eventually it will collapse. But accountability isn't just about avoiding collapse. It's also about driving excellence. When leaders hold themselves accountable, they create momentum. They inspire those around them to give their best because they know their leader is giving their best. Accountability raises the standard for everyone. It creates a ripple effect where people are motivated to be responsible for their own roles. It builds a culture of excellence because when the leader sets the tone, the team follows. Accountability also requires humility. It takes courage to admit when you've fallen short. It takes strength to say, I failed here, and I will own it. But that humility is not weakness, it's power. People don't follow leaders because they're flawless. They follow leaders because they're authentic. And authenticity shines brightest when leaders are willing to be vulnerable, to accept responsibility, and to grow from it. Leaders who pretend they're perfect create distance between themselves and their followers. Leaders who embrace accountability build connection. Finally, accountability is freedom. Some might think accountability is restricted, that it limits what you can do. But in reality, it's the opposite. Accountability frees you from the burden of pretending. It frees you from the weight of excuses. It frees you from the fear of being exposed. When you live accountable, you live in truth. You know that even if you stumble, you have the courage to own it and rise again. That kind of freedom is what allows leaders to lead bold, to take risks, to innovate, and to inspire others to do the same. That's why real leaders always look into the mirror. They don't just see the reflection, they see the responsibility. They don't just see who they are, they see who they must become. And every time they face that mirror, they remind themselves, leadership is not about titles, positions, or applause. Leadership is about accountability. It's about being the kind of person others can trust, depend on, and be inspired by. It's about holding yourself to the highest standard, not because others demand it, but because you demand it of yourself. That is the essence of accountability, and without it, leadership can never truly exist. When we talk about leadership, it's easy to picture someone standing on a stage, giving orders, or guiding a team through a difficult moment. But if you strip away the titles, the applause, and the external recognition, what truly defines a real leader is their ability to take responsibility. That is where the mirror comes in. The sixth keynote reminds us that real leaders, when confronted with failure, disappointment, or setbacks, don't point fingers outward. They turn their gaze inward. They don't immediately say it was a team's fault or a circumstances held me back. Instead, they look into the mirror and ask, what could I have done differently? What part of this result belongs to me? This is not easy. In fact, it may be one of the hardest disciplines of leadership, but it is also what separates average leaders from extraordinary ones. Real leaders understand that excuses may protect the ego, but they do not solve problems. Only ownership, reflection, and correction can do that. When a leader looks into the mirror, they aren't looking at perfection. They're looking at responsibility. It means having the courage to see where their decisions went wrong, where their preparation was insufficient, or where their communication failed. Leaders who always shift blame to others create a culture of fear and resentment. Team members under such leaders may work hard, but they will always feel as though they are carrying the burden of someone else's irresponsibility. On the other hand, when leaders consistently own their mistakes, they create a culture of trust. Team members learn that accountability is not a punishment, but a pathway to growth. And when the leader models that behavior, the rest of the team feels safe to follow. They begin to hold themselves accountable, not out of fear, but out of respect for the shared mission. This kind of accountability is not about self-punishment or tearing oneself down. It is about balance. A leader who looks in the mirror after every setback does so with the intent to grow. They ask, what can I learn here? How can I make sure this doesn't happen again? That simple shift in perspective turns failure into a teacher. Leaders who refuse to accept responsibility remain stuck in cycles of repeated mistakes. They blame the economy, the competition, or the people they work with. But leaders who look in the mirror break that cycle because they adjust, adapt, and correct themselves. They stop being reactive and start becoming proactive. Think about some of the greatest leaders in history, those who changed industry, movements, and even nations. Almost all of them had moments of profound failure. But what defined them was their willingness to face those failures honestly. Abraham Lincoln lost more elections than he won before becoming president, but he never blamed others. Instead, he refined his approach. Nelson Mandela, after years of struggle and imprisonment, never used his pain as an excuse to lead with bitterness. He looked inward, took responsibility for how he would respond, and chose to lead with forgiveness. These individuals teach us that accountability begins not with others, but with the person staring back in the mirror. Leaders who embrace accountability also understand that trust is their most valuable currency. Teams don't follow leaders simply because of their title. They follow leaders because they trust them. And trust grows when people know that their leader is not going to throw them under the bus when things go wrong. When a leader stands up and says, "This mistake is on me," it diffuses tension and opens space for solutions. The team no longer feels like they're being watched for mistakes, but rather supported in learning from them. That's how loyalty is built, not through fear, but through mutual accountability. Now, accountability in leadership goes beyond just admitting when something fails. It's also about following through on promises. When leaders look in the mirror, they are not only checking for mistakes, but also asking themselves, did I do what I said I would do? Integrity in leadership means keeping commitments, even when it's inconvenient or difficult. Real leaders don't hide behind excuses when they fall short of their word. They acknowledge it, they fix it, and they make it right. That consistency builds credibility, and credibility is the backbone influence. People may respect your skills, but they will only follow you long-term if they trust your word. A mirror also represents clarity. Many leaders operate in denial, refusing to see their weaknesses because it's uncomfortable. But mirrors don't lie. A real leader is someone who is willing to see both their strengths and their flaws clearly. They celebrate the victories, but they don't let success blind them to areas of growth. The mirror teaches humility. It reminds leaders that no matter how successful they become, there's always work to do, always room to grow, always adjustments to make. Leaders who lose sight of this truth often fall into arrogance, destroys teams. Accountability keeps leaders grounded. It keeps them connected to the reality that leadership is not about perfection, but about progress. Some may argue that focusing too much on oneself can become paralyzing, but true accountability avoids that trap. Real leaders don't dwell endlessly on mistakes. They acknowledge them, learn, and move forward. Accountability is not about shame. It is about empowerment. When a leader owns their choices, they also own their ability to make better ones. They reclaim control. They stop being victims of circumstances and instead become creators of new outcomes. That mindset shift is what fuels resilience. It's what allows leaders to rise again after setbacks, stronger and wiser. Another aspect of accountability that leaders embrace when looking into the mirror is fairness. Leaders who are accountable treat everyone by the same standard, including themselves. They don't expect their teams to follow rules they themselves ignore. For example, if a leader insists on punctuality but shows up late consistently, the team sees the hypocrisy. But if that leader holds themselves to the same standards or even higher ones, the team feels the integrity. Accountability means practicing what you preach. It means you are willing to do what you ask of others. That example is far more powerful than words. People will always follow what you do more than what you say. Ultimately, the mirror symbolizes the truth that leadership is a responsibility, not a privilege. It's not about being served, it's about serving. Leaders who look into the mirror understand that they are the first and last line of accountability. If things go well, they give credit to the team. If things go poorly, they take responsibility themselves. This mindset is rare but transformative. It builds organizations where people feel valued, trusted, and inspired to give their best. It creates environments where excuses are replaced by solution and blame is replaced by ownership. That is how real leaders grow, not only themselves, but everyone around them. When we say that real leaders always look into the mirror, what we are really saying is that leadership begins with personal accountability. It is the recognition that you cannot change others until you are willing to change yourself. You cannot demand growth from your team if you are unwilling to grow. You cannot ask for honesty if you are unwilling to be honest. The mirror forces leaders to confront that reality every single day. And when leaders choose accountability over excuses, they create a ripple effect. Teams become stronger, organizations become healthier, and results become sustainable. Because accountability is not just a leadership principle, it is the foundation of trust, growth, and long-term success. True leadership is not only about vision, authority, or the ability to influence others. It is also about the ability to maintain accountability when it matters most. The seventh keynote, Leaders Looking into the Mirror to Maintain Accountability, describes a practice that separates real leaders from those who merely hold positions of power. Accountability is the backbone of trust, respect, and integrity in leadership. Without it, even the most talented individuals eventually fall short. To understand accountability in the deepest sense, one must first grasp that leadership is not a privilege that grants immunity from responsibility, but rather a responsibility that demands a higher standard of self-examination. When leaders look into the mirror, they are not simply observing their reflection. They are engaging in a conversation with themselves about whether they are living up to the values, promises, and standards they proclaim to others. A leader who regularly checks themselves in the mirror is asking critical questions. Am I doing what I said I would do? Am I walking the path I expect others to follow? Am I upholding the commitments I made not just to my team, but to myself? This type of self-reflection is where accountability starts, because it acknowledges that leadership begins with personal responsibility before extending to others. The mirror does not lie, and in that honesty, real leaders find the courage to confront their weaknesses, own their mistakes, and take responsibility for their actions without shifting blame onto others. Accountability in leadership is not about punishment, but about consistency and trustworthiness. When leaders fail to hold themselves accountable, cracks begin to form in the foundation of their credibility. People watch what leaders do far more than they listen to what leaders say. A leader who preaches discipline, cannot show up on time, is not a leader who inspires lasting respect. A leader who demands excellence but cuts corners personally is not one who earns genuine loyalty. Conversely, when a leader holds themselves to the same or even higher standards than their team, they create an environment of mutual respect where accountability becomes a culture rather than a rule. The mirror becomes the leader's daily check-in to ensure they are not asking from others what they themselves are unwilling to give. One of the greatest tests of accountability comes when things go wrong. In moments of failure, it is tempting to point fingers, blame external factors, or deflect responsibility. Yet the leaders who truly transform teams and organizations are the ones who, when looking into the mirror after a setback, first ask, what role did I play in this outcome? What could I have done differently? Could I have prepared my team better? Could I have communicated more clearly? This humility to take ownership does not weaken a leader. It strengthens them because it earns the trust of their people. When leaders accept responsibility for failures, it liberates their teams to take risks, knowing that their leader will not abandon them when challenges arise. Accountability also extends to promises and commitments. Many leaders make bold statements in the heat of inspiration, but when the time comes to act, they falter. Looking into the mirror forces leaders to remember that their word is their bond. Every time they break a promise, no matter how small, they chip away at their credibility. True leaders understand that accountability to one's word is not optional. It is essential. If they commit to something, they follow through. And if circumstances prevent them from delivering, they acknowledge it openly and take responsibility instead of hiding or making excuses. Another layer of accountability lies in personal discipline. Leadership magnifies habits, both good and bad. If a leader is undisciplined in private, eventually that lack of discipline will show publicly. This is why the mirror is so crucial. It reminds leaders that accountability is not just about what the world sees, but about who they are when no one is watching. Are they managing their time wisely? Are they nurturing their health and energy to sustain their leadership journey? Are they holding themselves accountable for the values they claim to stand for, even when it will be easier to cut corners? Great leaders do not wait for external forces to hold them accountable. They self-regulate accountable. They self-regulate because they know their effectiveness depends on it. Accountability in leadership also requires embracing feedback. The mirror metaphor extends beyond literal reflection. Sometimes it is about allowing others to reflect back to you what they see. Leaders who refuse to listen to feedback or criticism often fall into blind spots that damage their leadership in the long run. But when leaders look into the mirror of feedback, they find opportunities to grow. They realize accountability is not about perfection, but about continuous improvement. By being open to correction, they send a powerful message. I am willing to grow, just as I expect you to grow. That humility becomes the anchor for trust within their team. Furthermore, accountability is what sustains credibility during times of pressure. When challenges mount, teams look to leaders not only for direction, but also for consistency. If a leader preaches resilience yet collapses under pressure without owning their reactions, the team loses confidence. But if that same leader looks into the mirror and admits, yes, this is difficult and I made mistakes in handling it, but here's how I will correct it. They model authentic accountability that inspires resilience in others. People do not expect leaders to be flawless. They expect them to be real. The mirror ensures leaders do not hide behind facade, but instead confront reality with honesty. On a larger scale, accountability strengthens the culture of any organization or community a leader is responsible for. When the leader holds themselves accountable first, it eliminates excuses for everyone else. It sets a precedent that accountability is not optional, but the norm. The mirror becomes a metaphorical tool, not just for the leader, but for the entire team. Each member reflecting on their own role and contributions. The leader's example cascades down, creating an environment where people trust one another, own their work, and strive for excellence without fear of blame game. The power of accountability also lies in its ability to create legacy. Leaders are remembered not just for their achievements, but for their integrity. When history looks back, it often asks, did this leader keep their word? Did they stand firm in their values even when it was inconvenient? Did they own up to their mistakes instead of hiding them? Leaders who consistently looked into the mirror, maintained accountability, leave behind reputations of trust, honor and respect that outlast titles, positions, or accolades. In conclusion, accountability is not something imposed externally, but something leaders must demand of themselves daily. It is in those quiet moments in front of the mirror that leaders face the toughest questions no one else may ever ask them. It is there they decide whether to take responsibility or to deflect, to uphold their commitment or to compromise, to be disciplined or to become complacent. Those who choose accountability consistently become leaders worth following. They inspire loyalty, trust, and respect, not because they are perfect, but because they are honest and dependable. Real leaders understand that the mirror does not lie, and by looking into it with humility and courage, they build the foundation of leadership that endures. Real leaders understand that leadership is not about a title, position, or authority. It's about influence, example, and the responsibility of shaping others' path. When they look into the mirror, they are not looking at perfection, nor are they seeking validation of their power. Instead, they are holding themselves accountable to a higher standard of integrity, humility, and authenticity. The mirror reflects back the person who must be honest enough to recognize flaws, courageous enough to accept responsibility, and disciplined enough to continue evolving. True leadership begins with self-reflection because one cannot lead others effectively if they are unwilling to first lead themselves. The mirror becomes a tool through which a leader sees not just their physical appearance, but their choices, decisions, and the impact of their action. It represents accountability because only when a leader owns their role in success or failure can they grow, inspire, and build trust among those they lead. A leader who looks into the mirror consistently reminds themselves that every outcome, good or bad, first flows through them. If a team succeeds, a leader celebrates the team but quietly reflects on how their guidance contributed to that success. If a team struggles, a leader does not point fingers outward, but instead ask themselves what they could have done differently to prepare, communicate, or support their people. This is the defining difference between a boss and a leader. A boss hides behind authority and blames circumstances or others when things go wrong. But a leader understands that the mirror does not lie. It forces them to see themselves as part of every equation, for better or worse. This self-awareness not only shapes their decision-making, but also builds credibility. When people witness a leader take ownership of both victories and setbacks, they begin to trust that leader on a deeper level. That trust is the currency of leadership, and it cannot be bought. It must be earned through consistency and accountability. Moreover, the mirror pushes leaders to ask hard questions about their motives. Why am I leading? Am I doing this for personal recognition? Or am I truly committed to the mission and the people I serve? These questions strip away ego and expose truth. A leader motivated by ego sees the mirror as a stage, a place to admire themselves. But a leader driven by service sees the mirror as a tool to check if they are staying aligned with their values and vision. This kind of self-examination requires humility, because it is much easier to point outward and say, they failed me, than to admit I could have led better. Yet real leaders embrace that discomfort because they understand growth lies on the other side of honesty. Every time they look into the mirror, they commit to asking not how others need to change, but how they themselves must improve. That inward accountability creates an environment where people feel safe to admit their own shortcoming, knowing their leader is modeling the very behavior they expect. Looking into the mirror also reminds leaders that they are human. They are not immune to mistakes, blind spots, or fatigue. This awareness prevents arrogance and keeps them grounded. When leaders forget to look inward, they risk falling into the trap of believing they are invincible. And that is when pride takes over and erodes trust. The mirror humbles them by reflecting their humanity, the flaws, the scars, the growth there is, reminding them that leadership is not about being perfect, but about being authentic. Authenticity is powerful because people do not follow titles, they follow truth. A leader who admits their mistakes and shows their humanity builds stronger connections than one who pretends to have all the answers. The mirror becomes a safeguard against hypocrisy, holding leaders accountable to the same values they expect from their team. Another critical reason real leaders always look into the mirror is because it teaches responsibility without excuse. Leadership is not about controlling everything, but it is about owning everything. A leader may not control every outcome, but they can control how they prepare, how they respond, and how they support others. The mirror reinforces that mindset because when a leader sees themselves, they cannot deflect responsibility to someone else. It forces them to face the truth. Did I prepare adequately? Did I communicate clearly? Did I empower my team or undermine them? The mirror is brutally honest, and it leaves no room for excuses. That accountability sets the tone for the entire team. Because when people see their leader taking full responsibility, they are more likely to do the same. Responsibility trickles down, and the culture becomes one of ownership rather than blame. Furthermore, looking into the mirror strengthens resilience. When leaders experience failure, the temptation is to hide from the pain, to look away from the role they may have played. But resilient leaders face the mirror, learn the lesson, and rise stronger. They do not wallow in guilt, but they do not escape accountability either. They use the mirror to confront reality, adapt, and keep moving forward. This resilience inspires their teams because people see that their leader is not broken by failure, but is instead refined by it. The mirror becomes both a place of accountability and a source of strength, reminding leaders that while they may stumble, they are also capable of growth, recovery, and greater impact. The mirror also fosters consistency, which is a cornerstone of leadership. It ensures that leaders check themselves regularly, not just during moments of crisis. A leader who only reflects when things go wrong is reactive, but a leader who looks into the mirror daily is proactive. They consistently align their actions with their values, measure their growth and course, correct before issues escalate. This consistency builds stability within teams because people know their leader will not shift blame or change direction based on convenience. Instead, They see a leader who consistently takes responsibility, models accountability, and commits to personal growth. That consistency creates confidence, and confidence creates loyalty. Lastly, the mirror symbolizes the silent but powerful contract leaders make with themselves. Every time they look into it, they silently declare, "I am responsible." This declaration is not for applause or recognition, but for personal integrity. Real leaders do not need external validation because they know the mirror holds them accountable. It is a private reminder that the greatest leadership battles are fought, not in boardrooms or on stages, but in the quiet moments of self-reflection. Those who win the battle with the mirror, those who are honest enough to face their flaws, strong enough to admit their mistakes, and humble enough to keep learning, become the leaders who earn respect, inspire loyalty, and leave a legacy of trust. In essence, the mirror teaches leaders that true accountability starts within, strips away the illusion of control, and forces them to focus on what they can change themselves. It prevents arrogance, fosters humility, builds trust, and sustains resilience. While it may be uncomfortable to confront their shortcomings, it's far more destructive to ignore them. The mirror does not lie, and leaders who are willing to look into it with honesty and courage discover the foundation of authentic leadership. They realize that the journey of leading others always begins with leading oneself, and that the reflection they see is not just an image, but a responsibility. Real leaders know the mirror is not their enemy, but their greatest teacher. And that is why they always return to it, because true leadership is built on accountability, and accountability begins with the person staring back at them. When everything is said and done, the journey of leadership is not about pointing fingers outward, but about consistently pointing inward. The mirror becomes more than just a reflective surface. It becomes a tool, a teacher, and a constant reminder that real leadership begins with the self. True leaders do not waste their time blaming circumstances, people, or systems for the challenges they face. They recognize that the first and most important battle is the one within themselves. It is through this inward focus that they grow stronger, clearer, and more effective in guiding others. The mirror keeps them grounded when pride tries to inflate them, and it keeps them hopeful when discouragement tries to pull them down. It demands accountability and provides clarity, ensuring that every step taken is intentional and every decision made is rooted in integrity. As leaders look into the mirror, they are forced to confront not only their strengths, but also their weaknesses. They cannot ignore the gaps in their character, the flaws in their discipline, or the inconsistencies in their behavior. Instead of avoiding these truths, they embrace them, using them as fuel for transformation. In doing so, they model vulnerability and honesty, showing those who follow them that leadership is not about perfection, but about growth, humility, and resilience. When people see a leader willing to face themselves, they are inspired to do the same. They begin to take ownership of their actions, to accept responsibility for their choices, and to understand that greatness is born not from external validation, but from internal mastery. The mirror is not always a comfortable place. It does not flatter. It does not filter. It does not lie. But in that raw truth lies the power of real leadership. Because when a leader can see themselves clearly, they can lead others with authenticity. They no longer chase approval or run from criticism. They stand firm in who they are and what they represent. And that steadiness becomes a guiding light for those who walk behind them. Leaders who refuse to look into the mirror eventually crumble under the weight of denial, excuses, and false appearances. But leaders who embrace the mirror rise with strength, direction, and clarity that cannot be shaken. In the end, leadership is not about titles, accolades, or authority. It is about responsibility, accountability, and influence. A leader who looks into the mirror consistently will never stop evolving, will never stop learning, and will never stop striving to be the best version of themselves. And because of that, they will leave a legacy far greater than their achievements. A legacy of authenticity, courage, and transformation. So if there's one truth that must remain, it is this. Real leaders always look into the mirror, because in that reflection lies the key to their growth, their impact, and ultimately their greatness.